I'm Greg Dunning. I'm privileged to be the son of John Dunning, who was a prolific producer in Canada and in Quebec. Well, in the summer, when I was looking for a job, like every student who was going to school, I would work on production, and I would be buried way down at the bottom of the crew list as a gopher or production assistant. So every summer I would work on my father's films. I mean, I worked on Happy Birthday to Me, and I worked on Princes in Exile. So these were films that I worked on in the summer, and I was very pleased to receive that the kind of money that you get on a film set as a student. It was very valuable when I went back to school. So I did that in the summertime, and then after I graduated from university, I went and worked in corporate for a while, and that was very brief. And then I started working as a assistant production accountant on, again, some of my father's films, like the Snake Eater films I worked on. And I actually did some accounting for Princes in Exile, worked on Whispers, which were like the early 80 films that my father produced. And during that time, we got acquainted with the distribution that my father was doing with Cinema International Canada, which also was the distribution and exploitation in the adult film theaters that they also still either owned or operated. So, and they also had a distribution portion of that business, which was even in children's videos and some of the films that ended up being CFP distributed product. So it was quite an active distribution sector, and that was always the case at Cinepix. So while I was working in production, I met a friend of mine who was I played hockey with, and he wanted to get into the sell-through video business, which was just on the cusp. You could go to almost any retailer, and they had videos for sale of almost any nature. And so he said, I want to get into this business and be a rack jobber and make money. People are buying everything, and we can make lots of money rack jobbing videos. And my dad said, wait a minute, hold on a sec. Why don't you guys help out my adult distribution business and my distribution company, which is not doing well. We're tremendously in debt, and we could really use some young legs to hustle and get this thing turned around. So that's when we started working in the adult video business, which was the Eve Theater at the time, which was the Guy Theater, which is right in the heart of the Concordia business center right now. But at one time it was a kind of a crummy area, and they had the Guy Theater with its 35 seats. We ran the Bijou cinema on Papineau. We had a theater in Quebec City called the Midi Minuit in the lower town of Quebec City. And we even had one in Toronto called the Eve Paradise, and on Bloor Street West, which is super trendy now. But at the time, we had an adult theater. And so we worked in that for about a year, trying to rationalize how to get it to be at least solvent, because it was losing about 10 grand a week in revenue. And so it was collapsing. And so my dad says, you guys get working in there and figure this out. And it took us about a year, and we finally stopped the hemorrhaging of the company. And we went to my father in his office, and we said, okay, John, this is what we've got to do. We've got to go and buy the best adult video lines that are available at the time. Kind of the same way that CFP had the Miramax line for a while, and then Alliance came by later on when CFP was distributing The Crow, and they said, okay, here's some money, we'll take that line from CFP and we'll look after Miramax from now on. And that's the way it was done in the, shall I say, legitimate business. Well, we wanted to do the same thing in adult. Let's take the best lines being made in California, steal them from our competitors, and then we'll turn the company around. John, we need 100 grand and we can do it. We'll go to LA and we'll just take the lines from these other guys. And that's when he said, whoa, guys, stop right there. I never wanted you to come into the business to be porn kings. I wanted you in the business to learn it. So if this is where we're at, shut it down. And so that's what we did. We spent the next year liquidating everything. We were selling film rights across Canada to other provinces that were interested in having our adult videos. We owned 2 of the theaters. We called real estate agents and we sold those buildings. I think they're now churches, or I don't know what the bijou is. It might be a church on Papineau and Saint-Joseph. In Quebec City, that theater is now, I think, like a community hall where people have all kinds of community events. And we sold everything right down to like the tables and chairs and everything we owned. And we were able to get the company completely out of debt. But when we were done, there was literally nothing left except 2 of us sitting on a chair in our office. And then at the same time, not to make this answer sound ridiculously long, at the same time we opened a video store in Ottawa that only sold videos. And at the time, this was like 1992, that was kind of weird. My dad had this idea that videos would take the form of pocketbooks. Back in the days, in the early days, people would go to the library if they wanted to read a book, because hardcover books were very expensive. And so that was the only way. And you'd go to the library, and for 25 cents or 10 cents, you were able to rent a book. You could take it home and you could read it. And he found a remarkable parallel between that and the video rental business. The only thing preventing people from taking a book from the library home or actually buying the book outright and keeping it at their house was that it was too expensive. And this was the case with videos. When they were being sold to the wholesale to the video stores, they were being wholesaled for like $75, $90. Sometimes over $100 a copy. And so it was completely out of reach for anybody to ever buy a movie and keep it at home. But then finally sell-through just started to come into vogue in the 90s, early 90s. And you could actually buy a video for $19.95. And if it was a favorite movie of yours that you planned to watch maybe again, then maybe you could keep it on your shelf. And that's what we were getting into. And so we opened this store in Ottawa because there was more flexibility with the importing of titles. Because if you wanted to import one title, for example, that was unavailable in Canada, you had to go to the Régie du Cinéma and pay $75, show your contract that you had the rights. I mean, all we wanted was a copy for one customer who really wanted it. So we went and set up in Ottawa where there was less restriction. And we sold a lot of video in our little store, which was 1,200 square feet. And the trouble is, there were so many costs associated with running that store that, I mean, at one time we sold we grossed $1 million in sales in that one little store, but the margins were so small and the costs were so substantial that we basically broke even the day we opened. And we ran it for 5 years and then just said, okay, this is not what we want. We don't want to live in this store for the rest of my life. We basically were living in the store trying to make it function. And but boy, we sold a lot of videos, made a lot of people happy with the product we were making available.
Well, you're selling like derivative products as well, like, you know, like for instance, I remember there used to be a store here called the Hollywood that would sell anything but the actual movies. You know, they would sell postcards, they would sell like, you know, like...
You're talking about Hollywood Video.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm not mistaken, that was on the corner...
Right next
to the bay.
Yeah.
Did you know what that building used to be?
Yes, I know.
That was one of our competitors back in the old days.
Exactly.
That was Cine 539, and that was an adult cinema at one time. Yeah. And one of our competitors, and also a colleague in the business, we all had an interest in making our cinemas successful. But no, we were strictly we had a little tiny bit of merchandise, some Disney cups, maybe some posters. But we were really in the business of giving people, it was called Video Shoppers World. And we were in the business of finding any movie you wanted anywhere. And that's what we wanted to do. We had catalogs that people could look things up to see if they existed. We even kept lists of people who wanted a movie that was out of print, just in case it ever came into print. And it used to happen all the time. I remember when there was a John Wayne film called McClintock that was unavailable, never had been on video, and people loved that film because it was kind of a sequel to what was that movie? John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara were both in it. And that was like a sequel to that original film. My dad would remember in 2 seconds what it was. But McClintock came out on video for the first time, and we called up over 150 people to say, by the way, I know you asked for it 2 years ago. It's finally here. Would you like to come in? And they used to come in about 10 minutes to pick up their movie because they'd been waiting all their lives for it. And so it was like as soon as someone called them and cared that they cared about what they liked, they were total fans of our store. But we had one store. All the overhead was completely absorbed in this one store, and the margins were like 15 to 20%. We couldn't make a living. Yes. When my father was, I knew that he was eventually going to pass. I knew that he had kept all kinds of, almost curated material from what he worked on all through his life, because, all of those posters that you see Cinepix, that Cinepix had, all of those video boxes, all of the sales and marketing material, he designed by hand out of his own brain. And he used to he kept all that visual material. The business affairs stuff, the contracts, the arrangements with sub-distributors and foreign sales, that was Andre's domain, and equally important because Andre Link's domain, because without the financing, without the business affairs, no creativity can really take place. So by having a great business behind all these films, which was Andre's domain, my father could be creative. And he used to design all these posters and these gimmicky sales things. I mean, I've still got buttons from films that they made and little pull-out. I still have them down in the basement. They're pull-out sales material that they used to bring at Cannes. All things to, generate an interest and to promote what they were trying to sell and make the public aware of and buyers aware of. And that's what's, I have all of these. I have lots of slides and photographs, stills, posters, scripts, hand-drawn storyboards. I've still got in the shrink wrap, I've still got the soundtrack to Initiation and do I have Pilufas? I'm not sure, it's in the basement, but I've got all kinds of material that's in very good condition that I said, wow, I mean, what am I going to do with this stuff? It's all in the basement. I found it. It was not like going into a hoarder's house. It was very well documented. My dad had an envelope, and in that envelope, it would say what the film was. They would have artwork and slides and still photos and the poster. He kept samples of all of that. And when I got down to the basement, it was a pretty big room. It's like a bunker in his condo, just full of these banker's boxes and all this material. And it's taken me about 3 years just to get through all of it and document it. And most of it now is documented on the website that I created called cinepix.ca. And I wanted to do the website because I noticed in the past when my father would make donations, for example, to the Cinémathèque Québécoise or to University of Toronto Media Commons, that they would do a wonderful job of documenting it, taking care of it, and then they'd carefully put it in a box and store it. Meaning it was inaccessible really that might not be completely true because I think they also do a great job of restoring and they do make it accessible, but it's available if you want to walk over there and look it up. But there's no real public easy availability for the stuff. So I better make a website with this stuff. So I've started a website about a year ago, and I've been scanning and just digitizing as much material as I can, photographing it when required. But a lot of the stuff my dad already photographed, so it's just a question of cropping it and finding and designing the website and putting it online so that at least there's a visual, easily accessible record for anybody who cares to explore it. So that's the main aspect of the project, was to just make it available publicly. Second part of it is that I'd like to get some of this original material into the hands of collectors who really appreciate it. My when I was working with my programmer, I went into his house, and there he had it. It was a kind of a beat up poster of Valerie in a frame in his living room. And I said, you know, Otis, what did you pay for that online? And he said $175. And I know I've got 5 or 6 of them that are in perfect condition in my basement. So I would rather 6 people in Quebec or wherever have a Valerie poster on their wall in their home. If that's what they like, then that's where it belongs. And to me, that's an activity that I can do with passion to try to disseminate these creations of my father's, and Andre too, to people who like them. And then what I'd like to do, I want them to have to pay for them, because I want to take that money and park it into like a fund, which will finance a prize for someone. And I think the best place would be the Fantasia Film Festival, where I know that like just putting the festival on, any festival is a struggle. And it's a lot of government financing, it's a lot of municipal grants, and even a lot of sponsorship from private firms. It's a labor of love. No one really gets rich doing this. And when a new filmmaker wins a prize, often there's not even any money to reward that achievement. So I would like to be able to produce a capital fund which on a perpetual basis will produce a reasonable prize, like a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 prize, if I can build up enough of a capital fund that can perpetually generate a nice prize. And I would use all of that archival material to fund that capital project. And that's the archiving, the multiple steps of the archiving project. Well, I kind of covered it earlier with when we were in the adult business, and we sort of decided that, well, if you want to succeed in this business, you got to be the king. And my dad just put the brakes on that ambitious plan of my friend Ian and I to become the porn kings of Montreal. He says, no, I'm happy with you figuring out the debt. So when he told us that, no, you're going to shut it down, that was probably that's the memory that really comes to mind during that time.
Incidentally, your father came into the business because his father ran theater and movie theater and kind of like put him to work during his youth.
Yes.
When you decided to get into the business, was there any kind of encouragement or discouragement from your dad, or just say, well, if you want to want to work into that field, that's okay with me, but if you don't, it's okay with me as well?
I think the second is you've hit it on the head. He recognized the gambling and the risk in the business. I mean, my dad, I don't think my father ever went to any casino in his life. And I said, Dad, you never played craps or blackjack? He went, I do it every day. I'm gambling every day. I'm gambling our house every day. That's what the bank is taking as collateral on every movie we make. I mean, my personal net worth is on the line every day. So he never had a succession plan in mind for me. That's why he said, go to school, get yourself a business degree. And I think he was hoping that I would succeed in corporate America, because I ended up going to school in upstate New York and in Michigan. So I don't think he ever, and I think he left, he really did say, if you're going to end up in this business, you're welcome to come, but there's no obligation. Well, Ilsa, the 3 Ilsas were made here, and there was one actually called Ilsa the Wicked Warden that was made by another company, also with Diane Thorne, but someone else made it. So there's really 4 in the franchise, if you will. But to sell these films and to have distribution, it's always about distribution. It was just maybe now it perhaps is possible with the internet, but back then with all of the mechanical and technical requirements to make DVDs and make VHS and even 35 millimeter prints to show in theaters for festivals or whatever, you need distribution. And so you made arrangements with companies to distribute for you in other countries. So you always had distribution. Ilsa was the same thing. It was just another film in the in the catalog of Cinepix, and it was wildly successful because of its it was notorious. All of them were. I mean, it had notorious recognition because theaters wouldn't play it, and
Its cover was very fascinating when you were a kid and you stumbled upon it in the video store. I can tell you that.
oh, and I can tell you it was quite interesting for me to be walking in as a kid. I guess I would have been about maybe 8 years old when if I don't know if the dates are quite right, but I was just a kid walking in the office of Cinepix and walking by the editing suite and seeing the cuts being made and the editing being done to Ilsa for the SS while I'm walking around. I mean, I wasn't on set, but I was certainly seeing the work. But to answer your question more directly, Cinepix made arrangements with sub-distributors in various countries, and let's just say they weren't the Paramount Classic line of Paramount or the Sony Pictures Classics of Sony. I mean, this was a different degree of distribution for this type of content, and they weren't always trustworthy. So I mean, Cinepix had trouble getting reports. I mean, I was working in video when we were trying to run a mail order business to sell more Ilsa to video stores, and we were trying to do it ourselves. And I'm telling you, it was a real battle. That's really tough work to try to do your own distribution, even across Canada, and to do it in a foreign country was impossible. So you had these marginal companies sometimes sending you reports, sometimes sending you some money. They'd send you a perfunctory advance just so you would send them a master. But after that, they were doing anything they wanted. And there wasn't even any copy protection at all. You had no copy protection, really, on the original material. I mean, most of the material was either Betacam or 3/4 inch master. There was no copy protection on that. There was no way for you to audit them. And so that's kind of how the film became sort of widespread around the world in kind of a, well, certainly not a legal way from an intellectual property perspective. And we tried to enforce and get compliance with our contracts, but what are you going to do? We sent lawyers letters, and if they don't respond, it would be more money just trying to enforce compliance with those contracts than to actually to do it. So Cinepix just ended up saying, fine, let it ride, forget about it, and let's move on to other films. Let's make more new movies, and let's continue with the business, and that's what they did. Well, first I want to finish this, I call it my legacy project. I mean, I really owe it to my father to do that. He was very generous with filmmakers and crew, everyone. He was an honest man with them. And they've been equally honest back in their feedback to him. But as a father, he was the most awesome guy, and and generous with me and my mother and the family. Just so generous with us. And I owe my very comfortable lifestyle because of my father's generosity. And I owe this to him to complete this project in the best way I can. Now, when Elephant was it was a great initiative by Québécois to do that, and I went to that press conference, and I thought it was a fantastic way to reward crews, particularly directors, on some of the fantastic Quebec films that have been made. And I mean, I know that Québécois had no intention on making profit from this. There's just not enough widespread mass interest in old films of any nature to really make a ton of money. So it was a great initiative. But what was unfortunate, and I know it bothered my father, was that the Cinepix films were not part of the Québécois, of the Elephant project. And I know that bothered him. So that would be one of my objectives, because I'd be willing to do it. I would be willing to do the work, and knowing full well in advance that it's a labor of love. There's no money in this, but I would do it to get his films and Andre's films on the the Quebec on the Elephant streaming service. And of course, I'd need lots of help from people to figure out the rights. But I know a lot of that work, there's already some people doing that. Like Marie-Josée Raymond has done a fantastic job with the films that are already there. And she has the expertise and the contacts to do that. So that would be ideal. And then I would love to see these films somehow, and even the soundtracks, being commercially available, either in a streaming sense or DVDs for the films, if people are actually still putting DVDs in their players. But it would require finding the source elements and maybe even just doing a lot of color correction and bringing them up to today's standard. I would love to see those films, and I think my dad would appreciate it. And so I would do that work, and that's my hope, is that his films would be, I mean, some of them, of course, are available, some of the later ones that Lionsgate and E1 consider worthwhile to keep going as a catalog product. But a lot of the early films, like Valérie, Initiation, Plus Face, Keep It in the Family, Blackout, Death Weekend, I don't think the only copies available now are bootleg VHSs and used copies from video stores, if there are any. Some of them have never even been released on VHS. So I would love to see those available to anybody who would like to see them. And I realize that there's not thousands and thousands of people, but there are collectors out there. There are people who appreciate it, who would like to have this as part of their collection.
And your father's memoirs are like a great window into the history of Canadian cinema, especially Quebec cinema. Do you know of any plans to have it translated into French? Because I think it really would resonate with people once they go beyond, just Cinepix, and like, oh, wait a minute.
Well, I first of all, I was very grateful that his memoir was published by anybody. I was going to publish it anyway with my own money and probably sell 10 copies to people if I did it myself. But thankfully, a publisher, Bill Brownstein, the author, who co-wrote it with my father, was able to get a recognized and respected publisher, McGill Queen's University Press, to publish it. So I was, not knowing anything about how the book business runs, I was really happy that the book got published. But quite quickly I said, wow, it's a drag that it's not released in French. I mean, I went, wow, what would that take? And I've even spoken to Andre Link about it, and he's given me some, as usual, some clever ideas about how you might go about that. But yeah, I'd love to see it in French, because I think it would really resonate with again, cinephiles and students in Quebec. I mean, that's definitely something on my mind, and if I could get that done, it would be great to do that.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure to speak to you.
The history of Cinepix is now slightly better known. And,
well.
As a kid, we didn't even know that Ilsa was actually like a Quebec thing. I mean, we just thought it happened to be on the shelves in French, and that it was like translated from Germany or whatever. You don't know. I mean,
it came from anywhere. That particular title came from almost anywhere.
Exactly. It didn't look like particularly Canadian or Quebec made. And then I was like, reading, it's like, oh, we knew about the third one being Canadian, but we didn't know about the first two being Canadian as well.
Well, I think Cinepix, and it wasn't on purpose. I mean, my father and Andre, every film was a new project, and every film, the intention was for it to be profitable, in order so that, my father's his intention was to take care of his family. That was the direction he was given by his grandmother when he was 17. Your father just died. You have 3 theaters in Verdun to look after. Get to it, young man. You've got people to feed. And I mean, that was always his objective, was to survive. I mean, he was a product of the recession and growing up in much tougher times. And but I think Cinepix sort of became a studio in Quebec in its own right, kind of, I would say, by accident, because I think they just tried to continue to make films that would resonate with the public. And but thank you for taking the time to interview me about this. It's my pleasure, Sarah and Eric. Thank you very much.